Good morning, everybody. My name is Christy Roberts. I am a single mom living in Orange County, California. I have a 13-year-old son who is starting 8th grade here in Orange County. He starts classes today, actually. So who is this video for? This video is for, first and foremost, my son's school administrators, also for the Orange County Board of Education trustees, for the public health officers in Orange County and California, any other school administrators in Orange County, and frankly, anywhere in the state or the country, and also for any and all parents and students who want to watch and learn from the material I'm about to present. Well, why did I create this video? So this is my son on his first day of school in 7th grade last year. As of today, he is not in school. He is actually starting school from home. Today, he cannot return to campus until a tentative date of 9/22/20. However, all kids K through 6 are returning to campus, so there are a bunch of kids on campus today. There are many requirements for these kids, such as mandatory masks, temperature checks, social distancing, and more that are required for the kids and will be required for my son when he returns to campus. And this is not acceptable to me. I am a voice for thousands of voiceless parents who either don't have the means to do the research that I've done or don't have the means to put together a presentation as I've done that you're about to see. My son is healthy. He is not sick. He has not had so much as a sniffle in months. I am trying to figure out why my son cannot return to normal school without emergency measures. So before I jump into the presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about me to give you context. I have a degree in psychology. I have worked several years in administrative roles in the medical field. I have worked in business. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've also been a health coach for 15 years. So I kind of bring together a lot of interesting backgrounds to pour into what I'm about to share with you. However, I want to share a little bit about my father because he was a huge influence on my life and contributed to what you're about to watch. My father was a news reporter in his 20s. He had a passion for researching news stories that may or may not have been true and identifying the truth. So he had a passion for seeking out truth versus fiction. And when I was in my 30s, he started a website called trutherfiction.com. He was actually a radio personality, however, and he was a minister. However, he had a hobby through this website where he would seek out rumors and urban legends and what are called e-rumors, and he would research fact versus fiction and report the results on this website. He actually wrote a book about some of the urban legends. I was his research assistant, and watching him through this journey had a huge influence on me because my dad was on the frontier of seeking truth and busting through pretension, even if it threatened the mainstream thought process or paradigms. My goal in this video is to come to you with as much data and to stick to the facts as much as possible. I also want to give a lot of disclaimers. I'm looking for the truth. However, I want to give disclaimers. I'm not a scientist. I am not a doctor. I am not an attorney. I have no legal training whatsoever. I'm not an epidemiologist. So I've done the best I can to put together some information for you. There is a lot of information in the following video. So my suggestion is that you grab a piece of paper, take some notes, and also that you because it's on YouTube, you can watch this video on 1.5 speed, even faster, depending on kind of what your speed is. And my goal is to present some really, some information to you. You may find mistakes. I've done the best that I can to be accurate in the data. However, I want to disclaim that I've done the best that I can. However, I'm not the ultimate, final say on any of the information I'm about to present. So before I jump in, I want to outline what I'm about to present to you. Number one, I'm going to go through some inconsistencies with the data. I'm going to go quickly through it because it's a lot of information, and I will give you a summary at the end. Number two, I want to talk about masks. Number three, I'll be going through a lot of legal data and information and implications of what's happening in the country right now. We will talk a little bit about temperature checks, and we'll talk a little bit about the moral dilemma that's facing all of us right now pertaining to our children. And at the end, I'm going to wrap it up with some suggested solutions just to get your juices flowing. Again, I'm certainly not the final say on any of this. My encouragement to you is, like I said, take notes, listen, keep an open mind, and use your critical thinking skills along with me, and let's see where we go. I also want to point out that I believe all of us watching this are a team. If you're watching this, it's because you're concerned about your kids And I don't point fingers. I'm not in a place of judgment. I think our school administrators and teachers are doing a phenomenal job of trying to keep the pieces together. I think a lot of people are dissatisfied and frustrated, including many of the teachers and the medical, and the school staff. So the educational staff. So let's all work together and come up with solutions together. So I'm going to jump right in. I have many questions about what's happening right now around the country. There are so many inconsistencies. My first question is, what is the legal definition of a state of emergency in California? I'm going to go through some of the legal jargon that I found on the California state website. According to Section 8625, State of Emergency, our governor is empowered to proclaim a state of emergency when he finds that circumstances described in Section 8558 exist. We'll go over that in a minute. Also, if he finds that the local authority is inadequate to cope with the emergency. So what does Section 8558 say? It says that a state of emergency means that we are in a state of extreme peril. For example, air pollution, fire, flood, storm, epidemic, riot, drought, sudden and severe energy shortage, etc., which by reason of their magnitude are likely to be beyond the control of the services, personnel, equipment, and facilities of any single county, city, etc., or such that would require combined forces of many regions. According to this, Section 8560, emergency plans include elements as continuity of government, emergency services of governmental agencies, mobilization of resources, mutual aid, and public information. So from what I understand, the governor's authority is to pull together resources to help provide for a state of emergency. So keep that in mind. These orders and regulations will, now look at this carefully, it will expire for a period of it'll expire if it's rescinded by the governor. Okay, the state of emergency will expire if it's rescinded by the governor, if he proclaims the termination of the state of emergency, or for a period of 60 days, whichever occurs first. Remember that. Also, it states in Section 8629 that the governor shall proclaim the termination at the earliest possible date that conditions warrant. Okay, and at that time, all of the powers will terminate, and there will be an end to the state of emergency. Again, it terminates either when he's proclaimed it or by concurrent resolution of the legislature declaring it at an end. That's Section 8629. However, I want to go back to 8627 and point out that it says, or for a period of 60 days, whichever occurs first. Whenever the state of emergency has been terminated, the orders and regulations shall be of no further force or effect. Okay, I'm kind of highlighting and summarizing for you. So my next question is then, surely we are still in a state of emergency legally, because my son is not at school today. Today's his first day of school and he's sitting on the couch as I'm recording this training. So let's discuss, are we actually still in a state of emergency? In California, our state of emergency was declared on or around March 17th. So by law, it would have ended on May 16th at the very, very latest. However, today we are going on 173, it might even be more than that, days. So it looks to me like the governor's legal authority in his emergency measures is over. According to the law, all of his orders are now null and void. We have other politicians that are working to also declare an end to the state of emergency, which is fantastic. However, as I'd like to point out, the law states that we are 60 days. At 60 days, it is officially over. Here was a meeting with the Orange County Board of Educator trustees, along with several doctors, also a few weeks ago, working to actually sue our governor to declare an end to the state of emergency. Again, that's fantastic, but the reality is, according to the law, unless I'm missing something, which I could be, and that's why I'm recording this training, it looks like it is over. Question number 3. Okay, so surely, because my son is not at school today, maybe we're still in a state of emergency medically. Even if it's ended legally, maybe we're still in a state of emergency medically. So let's look at some graphs that I have made, that I prepared. I pulled the raw data from the California state website, and I put them into graphs. I have not manipulated the data whatsoever. I just literally put it into graphs. As you can see there, here, this is a picture of hospital utilization, California only. This was a snapshot back on August 23rd, about 2 weeks ago. 6.7% of our California hospital beds had COVID confirmed patients. As you could see, we are nowhere near overwhelming our medical community. Therefore, we do not have a legal public health emergency, nor do we have a medical public health emergency. As you recall, the definition of a state of emergency was if we were going to overwhelm our resources. You can see here that there are, as of this date, there were 66,000 hospital beds available in California. 4,400 of them were filled with COVID confirmed, and a total of 5,600 were filled with suspected and confirmed COVID patients. This is Orange County, California. From March through August, where is the public health emergency? This is, again, COVID hospitalization. The blue line includes confirmed and suspected COVID patients. The red line is all of the available hospital beds. You can see for yourself that we were nowhere near overwhelming our resources at any time in the past several months, which brings into question, were we ever actually in a state of emergency? This is another visual that I created to show you. This is Orange County, California. You can see that all of the gray dots represent our entire population. The blue dots represent those who tested positive. The green dot, who tested negative. The green dots represent those who tested positive, and the red dots represent death. As you can see here, it doesn't appear to have been a state of emergency in Orange County at any time. In fact, our current Orange County death count is just over 1,000 as of this date. And I want to point out that in 2017, the flu death rate was 544. I would not consider this a state of emergency. In LA County, which is under incredible draconian lockdown efforts still at this point, this is accurate as of today. You can see for yourself the entire population. Those who tested negative are blue, those who tested positive are green, and deaths are represented by the red dot. Again, I do not see the state of emergency that justifies the extreme measures that are taking place in Los Angeles. And this is the whole state of California. You can see our entire population. Blue dots are those who tested negative. Green dots are those who tested positive. And the half of a red dot represents the death that has taken place over 6 to 7 months. Again, I do not see a legal state of emergency or a medical state of emergency that has been justified. This is a quick snapshot of reality, perception versus reality, in terms of a poll was taken of Americans. You can see what Americans perceive to be the problem and what the actual reality of the problem is. Americans who've had it versus deaths. Also, you can pause this video at any time or go back and watch it again. So is it possible that we never were in a state of emergency in Orange County, California, or even the United States? I don't know, but again, I'm presenting you the data. I'll let you come to your own conclusions. Question number 4, what about the death count? Surely hundreds of thousands are still dying, right? Because there are many, many states that are still in incredible lockdown mitigation measures. Well, here's a picture of the United States through August 29th. You can see here that it looks like we have reached the peak and we have the virus is fading out. So it appears that we have reached the end of the virus. Okay, so let's move on to question number 5. Well, then surely there's a second wave because it's such an issue around the country, right? I mean, my son is not at school. All right, well, let's talk about the second wave. Well, this is very interesting. There is something called Farr's Law, which was formulated by Dr. William Farr. He made the observation that epidemic events rise and fall in a roughly symmetrical pattern, and it's shaped like a bell-shaped curve that looks similar to this. So you can see here, this actually shows you what an epidemic looks like. Either the amount of death is the same. It all happens at once, or you can slow it down over time in order to prevent overwhelm in the hospital, but it's going to look the same. So you can see here we have a bell-shaped curve, and then we have this interesting bump here that is not natural. It doesn't follow the laws of nature. It doesn't follow Farr's Law. So that leads me to my next question. They wouldn't be messing with the death counts, would they? I mean, isn't that strange that there's this bump that is kind of popped up out of nowhere? So I started looking into and following different health policy experts. This particular expert has been studying that second bump, that kind of mysterious bump, and he has concluded three reasons, that three causes for this bump. Number one, there have been deaths from people crossing the southern border. In Mexico, their infection hit a little bit later than ours. And so the second wave of deaths in the southern states of America are aligned with the same death rates and the same flow, I should say, as the infection in Mexico. Number two, deaths that occurred months earlier that recorded now. This is called data laundering. And number three, falsified death certificates, for example, gunshot wounds and motorcycle accidents that were being recorded as COVID deaths. This has been proven, and they are working. We've seen many of these. I'm sure if you've been following any of this data, that's been happening. And from what I understand, they're being called into account. So this leads me to my next question. What about all of the excess death due to COVID? I mean, we've heard that there's been incredible amounts of excess death. Well, this is a graph of data pulled from the CDC website and the United Nations website. And as you can see, per week in 2017, the average death was about 54,000 a week. 2018, 54,000. 2019, 56,000. So far in 2020, 51,000 average deaths per week. This is for the United States. I don't see any excess death. All right. Well, my son is not at school, so let's keep going. Question number 8. But we've definitely had 160,000 deaths, correct? I mean, now I think it's up to 170,000. Well, there was a bombshell report released by the CDC a few weeks ago. They confirmed that of the total deaths in the United States, 6% were attributed to COVID-19 as the only cause mentioned. For the rest, 94%, they had 2.6 additional conditions or causes per death. Now, I want to add that this doesn't mean that those deaths did not take place. It does tell us a lot about the nature of this virus. I'm going to keep going here to explain this a little bit more. So at the beginning of the coronavirus, they actually changed, the CDC changed their guidelines for how to write up a death certificate. So if we were using their guidelines for the past 17 years for how to write up a death certificate, there would have been about 9,600 deaths attributed to coronavirus. But for some strange reason, they changed their instructions and they basically rearranged it so that if somebody did have multiple comorbidities, which means they had multiple other diseases and illnesses, maybe they had diabetes and cancer and heart disease, but if they died, if they had COVID and but possibly died from maybe complications with their cancer, as long as they tested positive for COVID, they were putting COVID on the death certificate as the main cause of death. And that is where you see the discrepancy and the confusion. So I think it's important to understand that the deaths did still take place, all right? But I'm going to give you a little bit more insight. Here's a visual that shows of all of the deaths in the United States. At least one, if you see the purple, these were people that had at least one, if not two, if not three underlying conditions, also known as a comorbidity. So this helps you understand, again, it tells us more data about the virus so we can make proper decisions for decisions for our children. This is a chart that I made, a graph that I made for New York. It's actually not New York City, my mistake on the label. And I want to point out to you, I'm going to explain to you because this was something I did a few weeks ago and it corroborates the report that the CDC just released. So if you study this very carefully, out of the deaths in New York, which was, I think the total was about 16,000 at the time of this report, 99% of them, if you look at the blue bars on the chart, 99% of these deaths were individuals who were already very sick with 1, 2, or 3 other illnesses. That's what the blue bars represent on this chart. New York was providing that data. These are people who had diabetes, cancer, heart disease, etc. My point is, we know who is high risk. This virus is not a mystery. Okay, the red bars, which you can hardly see, represent the people that had no underlying conditions, that were quote unquote technically healthy individuals, okay, that their death was attributed to COVID. So if we're going to compare it to the H1N1 from 2010, which had about 12,000 deaths attributed, COVID has had about 9,200 deaths attributed. So really let that sink in. And I thought this was very interesting. During an appearance on German television, there was a professor who would examine bodies after the death, and he found that all of the fatalities that he examined had serious previous illnesses, which would have soon resulted in death with or without the virus. So I want to make sure this is very, very clear what we're saying here. These were autopsies that were done. All right, question number 9. Be that as it may, surely we are still a long way off from herd immunity. Again, explaining why my son is sitting on the couch in our living room and not on campus today for his first day of 8th grade. Actually, coronavirus herd immunity may be closer than we thought because of flawed antibody surveys, which I'm not going to get into all the science and the data, but underestimating how many people may have actually had the disease or maybe for whatever reason immune to the disease. There's all kind of medical stuff involved here that have to do with T cells and people who were maybe already had some sort of a coronavirus, because coronaviruses are actually very common, and that could be providing immunity for a large part of our population. In fact, this was an article released in May of this year that the coronavirus was technically actually, the peak had happened and it was on its way out and it was disappearing so fast, and they were concerned that they maybe wouldn't even be able to have a working vaccine, which I find very interesting. Also, there were studies done that coronavirus, similar to other viruses, appear to die quickly in sunlight. And remember, we just came through a beautiful hot summer, so the chances of us being close to herd immunity are good. Question number 10. Well, there's no chance that they're messing with the case counts, right? Because again, there's still a big to-do around the country about coronavirus, and we see lots of emergency measures still happening, in many of the schools around the country. So I'm going to go through some data with you, try to follow along. These are some graphs that I have created. These are new cases in Orange County up through August. All right, well, with no context as to how many tests were done each day, this chart is incomplete. And actually, it's unethical to report data this way. This is actually a chart that is used to create fear. So you can see here that it appears, based on the blue line, that the number of new tests, positive cases, I should say, that were cropping up, it seems like it was growing up through August, which of course could be very concerning. Now, remember that blue line. This is actually the complete picture. So that blue line that you saw in the previous slide is the same as what you're seeing here. Notice that the testing increased dramatically. So the testing is the red line. So you can see that the testing significantly not only doubled, not only tripled, not only quadrupled, but significantly increased. And that would explain the number of new cases. Why is that? Because this is a widespread virus. The more that you test, the more cases you will find. Now we're moving on to, that was just Orange County. I'm going to show you the same thing in California. With no context on how many tests were done each day, this chart is incomplete. Again, it's unethical to report data this way. This is new cases found in California. Again, it makes it look like the virus is growing and spreading throughout the summer, which it actually was not. So this is the complete picture. The red line indicates how many tests were done. You can see they dramatically have increased the testing done in California. In comparison, you can see the number of positive cases has not actually gone up in corresponding to the number of new tests done. So I hope this is helping you understand. And then I ran the same information for the entire United States. So you can see the number of new cases. This is a chart often used in mainstream media to create fear. It's incredibly inaccurate and unethical. Anybody who knows anything about statistics or numbers or data knows that you don't report data this way without the complete context. So remember that blue line. That blue line is the same blue line here on this chart here. However, the red line shows you how many tests were done. You can see the dramatic increase in testing, thus corresponding increase in cases. It does not mean that they found all of the new cases, nor does it mean that the cases were growing. This is a widespread virus. Millions and millions of people have had it, similar to the flu. Millions of people would have it at one time. You increase the testing, it's like throwing a dart into a room of balloons. Something's going to pop. You're going to find people with the virus. There was the president of Tanzania. This was in the news. He actually tested a goat and a piece of fruit, and they both came back positive. So we're talking about the testing and concerns about the testing. And also we have seen many reports of people who work in the medical field. This is somebody who works in the medical community in Orange County and found that their hospitals were basically empty. All right. So there's something going on with the positive cases and the testing. NFL tested 75 positive They received 75 positive tests, and they returned back second time around as negative. And there was a recent study done a week or two ago that actually explained what could be happening. So it has to do with the sensitivity of the test versus the virus. There's a possibility that up to 90% of the positive tests in the United States were actually not people who carried the virus, or they carried a relatively insignificant amount of the virus and are not likely to be contagious. Again, it has to do with the sensitivity of the test, and they're finding that 90% of the people barely carried any virus. This was just released yesterday. A university said that there were many false positives amongst athletes that inflated the COVID numbers up to 600%. That was at the University of Arizona. So to clarify, this is somebody in the medical community. Again, you can check me on the data. All right, I'm not saying I'm the final authority here, but you can see here in the first paragraph, she says COVID refers to a diagnosis of somebody who exhibits symptoms like fever, coughing, and shortness of breath. If you're asymptomatic, you do not have it. All right. It is not spreadable. And this is very, very important to know that this is what the most recent data and science have shown. So we're going to keep going. Question number 11. Surely kids haven't been anywhere near each other for the past few months because this is so deadly, right? It's such a huge concern that my son can't go to school and his classmates that are at school are wearing masks. Oh, but that's not the case. Look here. We have stories all over the country of extended daycare camps having been open for the past few months. People their kids are in daycare at the same school, but they're just paying for it this time. Many essential workers had their children in daycares this entire time. A teacher's assistant said that she was working daycare, looking after children at the school she used to work at before the pandemic. So basically, kids can go to school. This is a parent who said she'd been solicited to come and volunteer at a lot of in-person events at churches and gyms, and gymnastics. She's saying kids can't go to school, but they can be on their campus. This is a public school in, I don't know the county or the state, Durham Public Schools, providing in-school centers for students during remote learning at their school. Okay, so, more inconsistencies. Let's keep going. Question number 12. Surely this virus is more deadly than the flu since we're placing precedence on it at the expense of every other aspect of children's well-being. So let's look at this virus versus the flu. Actually, fewer children have died this year from COVID-19 than from the flu. Children are almost 20 times as likely to die from an injury as from COVID, and it is shown that the flu kills twice as many children in Britain as coronavirus. Please let that sink in. Okay, question number 13. We're having fun with all these inconsistencies. It's kind of mind-blowing. Surely they're keeping my son home because he's high risk and could die from this. So let's talk about the actual statistics of children. Remember, my son has a great immune system. He's not sick and he cannot spread a virus he doesn't have, but yet he's sitting here at home on the couch today, not at school. This is another graph that I created. This is cases versus death by age group for the state of California. Study this graph carefully. Children do get the virus, but do not die from the virus. All right. So I want to show you, if you look at the blue lines are the cases, the blue bars. So you can see that children 0 to 18 on the left, 9% of the positive cases were children from 0 to 18, children or teenagers. However, you can see the red bar represents deaths, and you can see there are 0 deaths in that category in California. 0 children have died from coronavirus in California, and more children have died from the flu. You can also see, we're going to come back to this, but you can see the highest death count. The red bar on the right was ages 65 and actually ages 75 and over. We'll come back to that soon. Here's a picture. I want to focus on the children. So the blue bar would be ages 0 to 19. These are the cases in the United States through August 23rd. The blue slice of the pie are children. You can see here, this is hospitalizations. The blue slice of the pie is children. And you can see here, these are fatalities, again, for the United States. You can't even find the blue piece of the pie to represent children. So apparently children are not high risk to die from this virus. I just proved it for you. Follow the data. Follow the data. Question number 14, but this virus is super deadly in general, right? I mean, we've heard over and over that it's a very deadly virus. Well, actually, the CDC itself has confirmed that the fatality rate is 0.26%, which is not only much lower than the original estimates, but it is pretty similar to that of a bad flu season. These are just some graphs and data, which I won't get into. You're welcome to pause the video if you want to watch it. But there was a recent study, or if you want to study it, there was a recent study done by UCLA and Stanford University. An average person has 1 in 3,800 chance of getting infected, and this is without any masks or social distancing or emergency measures. Pardon the typo there. The odds of being hospitalized, even for somebody in an at-risk category. For an average person between 50 and 64 years old, the chances of getting infected and needing hospitalization are 1 in 852,000. For that same person, the chances of dying are 1 in 19.1 million. These were based on the last week of May, when the deaths were 16 times higher than they were last week. And just for comparison, the risk of dying in a car crash are 1 in 114. I'm going to give you some visuals here. These are your chances of getting infected. These are your chances of being hospitalized. These are your chances of dying. This is without emergency mitigation measures like masks and social distancing or physical distancing. I Googled, again, the chances of dying in a vehicle crash are actually, according to Google, 1 in 103. Most Americans are more likely to die of natural causes, chiefly heart disease or cancer. So study this very carefully. Moving on, question number 15. Well, maybe kids are super spreaders and lead to the deaths of adults. All right. Well, actually, if you go to, if we study what they did in Sweden, where most schools stayed open with very, very mild emergency measures, they did not require masks. They found that teachers were at no greater risk than the overall population. Dr. Witowski is an epidemiologist. He's actually one of the leading epidemiologists in the world. And his viewpoint was, as with every respiratory disease, protect the elderly and fragile, but children do very well. They're designed to be exposed to viruses, and they should keep going to school because it contributes to herd immunity. And his perspective was, after about 4 weeks, that the virus would have peaked and left, and the elderly could kind of rejoin the social events. As with all respiratory diseases, the only thing that stops the disease is herd immunity. He said a majority of people won't have even recognized that they were infected, or they would have had very mild symptoms, especially children. And he kept emphasizing that it's important to keep the schools open and keep the kids mingling without masks, mind you. And again, separate the elderly and the high risk. So this is a very different perspective than we've heard all along. I want to avoid getting political here, but he was asked about the projected 2 million, and his response was, I am not paid by the government, so I'm entitled to actually do science. If there had been no emergency measures intervention, the epidemic would have been over. When he says intervention, he means lockdown. And like every other respiratory disease epidemic, it would have been over. All right. So take this take it in, and you may have your own opinions about this. We're focusing on the data and the science. This is Dr. Frank, who runs a group on Facebook. He is actually known for focusing on the data and the science, and he has done some numbers here to show that elementary and high school kids do not easily catch or spread it. Of the 8,700 deaths in Florida attributed to COVID, only one of them was under the age of 10, 3 were 15 or younger, only 7 were 18 or younger. And he said at these young ages, there were special circumstances involved. All right. And let's see, the European DNA and contact tracing studies basically confirmed there was very little that they could find adult to child transmission, but they could not find any cases of children transmitting to adults. All right. And this was his opinion. Kids desperately need to be in school for myriad reasons, including their mental health, social development, physical development, and academic growth. Even if kids did spread it to each other, they would be helping build. They're the ones with natural immunity and, of course, at low risk. And this is a report from Dr. Jeffrey Bark, or a post from Dr. Jeffrey Bark here in Orange County, California. The percentage of school staff or instructors who contracted COVID was no greater than the broad population. This was based on a report from the Public Health of England. pertaining to kids that went back on campus. This is a civil rights attorney here in Orange County. She says the evidence is clear. Kids are not at risk from COVID. Teachers are not at any higher risk in a school than they are in the general at the grocery store. Time to go back to school. Let's keep going. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Just hang in there with me. You can always go back and watch the video again. I want to try to get through this as quickly as I can. Question number 16. Surely none of these experts, or none of the experts, I should say, want the kids to go back to school, right? I mean, maybe that's why my son is not in school today. This is from the Wall Street Journal. They are talking about the so-called second virus wave. It's far less deadly than the first. They're saying the progress should give Americans more confidence that schools and businesses can reopen safely. Dr. Scott Atlas, who now is on the White House COVID advisory board, believes kids should go back to school. This was actually Dr. Fauci saying that if you're concerned, you may not want to go to school, but for others who are generally healthy and don't have underlying conditions, I would encourage them to go and begin the in-person teaching. This is about teachers from Dr. Fauci. Even the CDC director has been very concerned and has said keeping kids out of the classroom could be worse than sending them back. So that's a little snapshot of what the experts are saying about this situation. Question number 17. Well, surely online learning is just as good as in-person learning for these kids, since right now it appears in California, the powers that be think that online learning for a certain age group of the children is somehow acceptable. So let's see. Actually, that's not the case. My timeline has been full. I want to try to respect the images I took out names, and I'll move quickly through the images of other people's children. I will say that I had post after post after post in my timeline of parents talking about their children melting down, being stressed out. These are two young girls doing virtual learning outside of Taco Bell because they don't have Wi-Fi. This is a child who was frustrated. This is a parent who was frustrated, a parent who was frustrated, a parent who was frustrated, distressed. I mean, the amount of distress and frustration was heartbreaking. Also, inside of the school system is where child abuse is identified, child hunger is identified, where vision issues are identified, and more. Health experts are, of course, very concerned about suicide among teenagers during COVID-19. The rates of depression, not to mention other mental health concerns, are epidemic in our children right now. So if coronavirus deaths has been the focus, there's been a lot of neglect to the other concerns that are taking place as a result of some of these emergency measures. And remember, we're not technically in a legal or medical state of emergency anymore. Treating children like they're sick when they are not is not okay. In my opinion, it is a form of mental abuse. In fact, I'll reference that in a minute. Why are the healthy kids being penalized and being forced to stay at home while their education, their social health, and their mental health are suffering? In fact, there is a name for this condition when a parent treats a child as if they are sick when they are not. Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This is a disorder imposed on another. It is a condition in which a caregiver creates the appearance of health problems in another person, typically their child. This is not okay. When I see the images of the children at my son's school walking around campus in masks, these children are healthy. These children are not sick. They should not be treated as if they are sick. We are actually teaching our healthy children to be neurotic, paranoid, and to behave like hypochondriacs, and to think that there is something wrong with them and something wrong with other people. Think about it. Teaching our children to mask their faces, physically distance, be paranoid about germs on themselves or others when they are not sick at all. This is not okay. Our kids are counting on us. To all of the adults watching this, our kids are counting on us to manage our emotions, use our logic, and be the adults in this situation. We do not need to treat a paper cut with a body cast. Moving on, question number 18. Surely the teachers are all high risk. Maybe that's why the kids must stay home and take one for the team. Pardon the typos in that header there. Maybe that's why my son is at home today. So let's clarify, who is high risk of dying of this virus? I should say, dying with the virus. So I want to go back to the circle chart that we saw. We see here that of the deaths in the United States, you can see the blue area are fatalities age 70 and over. As you can see, this is a significant number of the deaths that took place. Also, we know that most of the people who passed with coronavirus had 2 or 3 serious diseases at the same time. These are people who were already very sick. This tells us something very important about the virus. This is just an example of some of the diseases. This is some data that a lot of people don't know. I pulled this data myself. This disease targets the Latino community. Why? Why aren't any of our doctors and scientists telling us this information? I don't have the answers, but I can tell you if you look at the red bar on this graph, you can see that 48% of the deaths in California were Latino, 29% were Caucasian, very few were Asian or Black. And gender demographics, 57% of the deaths in California were male, 42% were female. So let's clarify who is actually high risk of dying from this virus. People over 65 or 75 with 1, 2, or 3 serious underlying conditions, focusing on Hispanic or Caucasian men. So this is an example of who is high risk for the virus. This is an example of who is not high risk for the virus. Are you seeing the difference? Okay. Question number 19. Surely no other countries sent their kids back to school in person without masks, right? I mean, wouldn't that just be unheard of? Actually, that's not the case. Sweden never closed daycare centers or schools for their children ages 1 to 15. Of these children, 0 died from COVID. 0. Very few were hospitalized. Sweden is now on the tail end of their virus. They have had no deaths for a week. You can see here it followed the Farr's law, the bell curve, exactly according to science. There are schools open across Europe as we speak, and they consider it their moral duty. The government considers it their moral duty to get their kids back on campus. Number 20, maybe our governor is waiting for the vax. Maybe that's what he's waiting for. I'm not going to say the whole word because this video could get audited or could be censored. But we all know how well that vax works, right? Oh, actually, just kidding. The flu has a vax and still kills tens of thousands each year. All right, so that cannot be the reason. Question 21. Surely there is a precedent for public health policy to use emergency mitigation measures on the healthy individuals. So do we mask and lock down the healthy, or do we mask and encourage those with symptoms to stay home? Let's think logically about this. So I hope you are seeing that masking healthy people is anti-science. In fact, if you care about other people, my suggestion, as Dr. Witkowski said, is that we do quarantine grandma. I mean, obviously this applied at the beginning of the quarantine. At this point, I'll let you make your own decisions. But the healthy people need to unmask and get back to life as normal. The healthy, those who won't die from this virus, are supposed to finish out herd immunity. We have strong immune systems. The virus does not kill us. That is how we protect the high risk, the elderly and infirm, and those with many comorbidities. Follow science, not fear. This is a snapshot from the CDC website talking about what to do with the flu virus, with the flu. It basically, I'll just go through it for you. It says take preventative measures like avoid close contact with people. Basically, don't cough or sneeze on people. Wash your hands. Stay home. That's it. Okay. It doesn't say anything about crazy emergency measures. And yet we just saw that the flu has killed more children than coronavirus. If somebody is sick or has symptoms, they can take their own temperature. They should stay home. They can mask up if they want to. That's a personal choice. They can physically distance from people. That's up to them. Question number 22. Surely everybody, including our politicians, is staying on lockdown with masks because this virus is so deadly that my son cannot go to school today. Remember, our children's education is being infringed on. Oh, hold up a second. I guess that they're not all staying home. This is, I think, a riot or a protest. This was at I think this was in South Dakota, or at one of the presidential rallies. This is a Philadelphia mayor who banned indoor dining, but was caught dining indoors. This is at George Floyd's funeral. I see no social distancing happening here. This is at the Republican National Convention. No masks, no social distancing. This was just the other day. This is a rally with Al Sharpton. These are students at a local, I don't know the actual exact location, but these are athletes and high school football. It's back on. This is in the past couple of weeks. I don't see many masks, nor do I see any social distancing. But my son did not get to start school on campus today, his 8th grade year. Andrew Cuomo was spotted without a mask, and the best one of all, Nancy Pelosi, as we all know, decided to get her hair done indoors without a mask, breaking all of the mandates in California. So recently, some gym owners found out that government buildings in San Francisco have had their gyms open for months. And this one really takes the cake. This is Wuhan with a huge concert pool party after 3 months of no reported coronavirus cases. All right. John MacArthur, a pastor of a church in Los Angeles. You can see the part I bolded in red. We've been suspicious of the fact that we've been meeting together now for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we don't know anyone who is ill. Nobody in our congregation has ever been to the hospital with this. I will let you come to your own conclusions, but I'm going to wrap this up for you with here's what we know. We know that we are no longer in a state of emergency legally as of May 17th. We know we never were in a state of emergency medically. The virus has phased out in the United States. The second wave death counts are questionable. There is no excess death in 2020. 94% of the deaths were people who were already very ill with many underlying conditions. We are close to herd immunity. New cases are a function of testing. Testing has increased dramatically, so cases will increase as well. 90% of positive tests may have been false positives. Daycares, summer camps, etc. never stopped. Schools are being used for on-campus remote learning. COVID-19 death rate is 0.26%, that of a bad flu. There is a 1 in 19.1 million chance of dying from COVID based on the current data and stats, and obviously a significantly higher chance of dying from a car crash, but yet we're still driving every single day. 0 children have died from COVID-19 in California, at least as of the date of my research. The flu is at least twice as deadly for children than COVID-19. 72% of COVID-19 fatalities were 70 years and older. The nation's top experts highly urge the kids to be back in school on campus. Many kids are melting down and suffering due to online learning, including increased depression, suicide, and many other mental health issues. The teachers at the highest risk are over 65 to 75 with multiple medical conditions. So my suggestion is those teachers might not want to come back to campus right now if they are concerned. Many other countries and regions opened back up, many without masks with no negative implications, and some stated that it is their moral obligation to get their kids back on campus. The flu does have a vax and still kills thousands of people each year. Kids are not super spreaders. They don't spread it to adults. And it actually is important to keep the healthy kids in school because they do help finish out herd immunity. They have healthy immune systems. The virus sometimes it barely affects them. If it does, it's like a flu. We don't mask and quarantine the healthy and those without symptoms. And even our politicians are not staying home or masking up. So remind me again why my son can't start school on campus today and tomorrow. Do you feel like you're in the twilight zone? Because I do. All right, now we're going to talk about masks. Let's take a deep breath. You can take some notes, take a breather, pause the video, come back. We're going to move into talking about masks. All right, I have more questions. Let's use our critical thinking skills. Let's put on our thinking caps. Question number 1. A mask is just an article of clothing, correct? So you've heard the no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? Actually, that's incorrect. Wearing a mask is considered a type of medical treatment. The FDA considers masks to be a type of medical device. Anything that obstructs your breathing or that could change the physiology of your body is considered a medical intervention or a medical treatment. Okay, think about this very carefully. When you go onto the FDA website, they give instructions, including people who have difficulty breathing, maybe emphysema, conditions of the lungs, to not wear a mask. So that, again, helps you logically understand what I'm telling you right here, that a mask is actually a form of a medical device. It can change the physiology of your body. The reason I'm harping on this slide is because this is probably a cognitive dissonance paradigm shift for you from what you're hearing and what you've been seeing. everywhere, but I'm about to change it for you. All right. Face masks marketed to the general public for non-medical purposes are not medical devices. Face masks, when they're intended for a medical purpose, such as source control, including uses related to COVID-19, are medical devices. Okay, very important that you understand that. Question number 2. Surely there is a mask law because that's why everybody is wearing them. Actually, newsflash, there is no mask law. No governor can create a mask law or, frankly, dictate any individual person's behavior. I want to give enormous credit to Peggy Hall, a local public health expert here in Southern California. A lot of what I'm sharing with you is information I've learned from Peggy or the influence of Peggy. So Peggy, I want to give you credit. Thank you so much. Peggy does a video explaining why state governors cannot order citizens to wear masks. If you do not believe me, go watch Peggy's video. It will help you understand. Question number 3, to be clear, it is not a law. He has made a mandate or a request, which is very different than a law. It is not enforceable by law. Question number 3, surely the areas who masked are seeing the virus gone. The areas meaning the countries or the regions. Well, isn't this ironic? Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Hawaii, all 3 that were pretty rigid with mask mandates. Hong Kong is on its 3rd wave of lockdowns. Philippines is on its 2nd wave of lockdowns. Hawaii has seen a 700% increase in cases. Again, that could be because of an increase in testing. However, it's almost like a respiratory virus is going to do what it's going to do. We have evidence right here in front of us that areas that required masks are still seeing the virus spread. This is Peru, the country with the world's strictest lockdown, is now the worst for excess deaths. Okay, let that sink in. Question number 4. Well, surely people are wearing the masks properly. Just kidding. This is an article going over just some of the mistakes that people are making with their face masks. Simply wearing a mask isn't enough. You still have to do all the other measures, maybe using the wrong materials, putting it on and taking it off incorrectly, wearing it the wrong way, putting it on too late, taking it off too early, contaminating it, touching it, putting masks on the wrong people. For example, I don't know what that means, but they referenced children too young or people who can't breathe or who can't take their mask off themselves, not washing your mask every time you wear it, taking shortcuts, I'm not sure what that means, or storing it wrong. These are just some of the mistakes that you can make with a mask. And we're asking children to put on a mask for one reason, because we're assuming that it will prevent the spread of a virus. Let this really sink in. I'm really asking you to use your critical thinking skills right now. I know this is probably a lot of cognitive dissonance, meaning it's probably challenging your thought process right now, especially if you're really, really stuck on masks. Number 5, surely we have studies and evidence that the masks that kids are wearing are protecting them from getting and spreading this very quote unquote deadly virus. Actually, there's a lot of homemade craft projects going around. People wearing bandanas looking like banditos. Nobody trained how to use them, not fit tested, breathing through dirty face coverings, touching them, etc. All right. Even the box says it does not protect against COVID-19. I'm really asking you to think very carefully because we are asking our children to wear a mask. Why are you asking your children to wear a mask? Europe's top health officials say masks are not helpful in beating COVID-19. This was a little piece of irony. I took this off the CDC Facebook page last night. They're saying that the cloth masks that are used to slow the spread of COVID-19 offer little protection against wildfire smoke. They do not catch small particles found in wildfire smoke that can harm your health. Isn't that interesting? Because I did a little research and the COVID-19 virus is significantly smaller than the particles from wildfire smoke. You can come to your own conclusions. So let's talk about face masks. Non-surgical masks, right here on the CDC website says, CDC website says, face masks do not provide protection from viruses. It says it right here. Actually, surgical masks do not provide protection from viruses. They are made to protect against bacteria being exchanged from a surgeon to his patients or back and forth in the middle of surgery. Bacteria, very different than viruses. Respirators are the only face mask that, when properly fit tested, provides a higher level of protection. This is from a doctor. She says, non-medical friends, you've bought yourself a box of N95 and you think you're good, N95 masks. But let me explain what my hospital makes me do every year to make sure that they fit. First, I have to put the right mask on and have a big plastic hood over my head, and then they spray aspartame. This is an entire fit test, all right? Unless they are fit tested, here's our health policy expert again, Matthew McBride. Unless they are properly fit tested and airtight, they are not working. These are N95 respirators. So I ask you, are all of the children in your school using N95 respirators? Have they been properly fit tested? Is this sinking in? The insanity of what we're talking about here. OSHA has all kinds of guidelines about what masks can be used for airborne particles to provide barrier protection. Question number 7. Surely there's no medical risk to wearing a mask. I hear a lot of people say, well, what if it, just in case, let's just wear it just in case. Well, I'm asking you to take into account all of the information I've shared with you so far in this training. Think about the fact that we're not dealing with a true emergency. Think about the fact that children are not at risk. Think about the fact that we know who's at risk. Let's talk about if there are any risks to wearing a mask for our children. You can read the list yourself. I want to focus on number 2. They can be very uncomfortable and anxiety producing, primarily because of number 3. They do restrict your flow of oxygen. Anybody who says otherwise is not being honest. Number 5, they can force you to draw closer during conversations because you can't hear or understand people. So ironically, you're getting in somebody's airspace where more transmission of a virus is likely. They can spread disease if not washed. I've heard stories of infections because people are wearing them too long. Damp face masks that they're wearing, they're just breathing in their own carbon dioxide and their own damp air. I've heard of respiratory and lung issues and teeth and breath issues. The reality is our children are not created to have their faces covered where they cannot breathe and speak freely. Question number 8. Oh, let me back up here. This is talking about people with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, should not be wearing face masks because they are in fact intolerable as it worsens their breathlessness. Okay, so if there are people with problems breathing, asthma, etc., that cannot wear a mask, this tells you that the mask does affect your oxygen intake. Question number 8. Surely there's no psychological consequences of wearing a mask. Actually, yes, there are many. Adverse psychological and psychosocial consequences of wearing face coverings for children and adolescents. I will let you pause the video and read the list through. I'm not going to go through all of them. I want to point out a few. First of all, it stifles speech and discourages free communication, which is the opposite of what we are doing, what we need to be encouraging in our children and their child development, their healthy development. Number 2, masks are absolutely dehumanizing. It covers one of the most important parts of human interaction and communication, the mouth and the smile. It causes a breakdown in basic human social interaction. There's a breakdown in social cues and the vital nonverbal communication. For younger children, it helps stunt child development in terms of empathy. You can't see facial expressions. It perpetuates fear. If a bunch of healthy people are walking around and they're covered up, it's a perception of threat to each other and fear to each other, which is very psychologically damaging. And you can read the rest. It's extremely concerning. And we don't even have any studies yet on the long-term effects of masks on children. Wearing masks and living in a world where everyone else is wearing masks can only lead to negative psychological effects. There is no psychological upside or benefit to wearing a mask. Masks create handicaps for our kids. This is the opposite of what we are obligated to be teaching and nurturing in our children. The Netherlands refuses to mandate face masks. Sweden says they're pointless. And lastly, I want to point out that from the beginning, none of the medical professionals could agree on the efficiency the efficacy of masks, including we were told for many months not to wear them. I'm sure you remember that. The virus has been in the United States since January, and we just started masking up in April after our peak, okay? And we were running around all of the stores mask-free for 4.5 months. So please think clearly about what we're talking about. You might not want to hear this, but just consider that forcing people, especially children, to wear masks has nothing to do with safety. Just consider. And my last appeal to you is, how can any sound mind be okay with this image? All right, guys, hang in there with me. We're going to move into the next section, which is what are the legalities of this situation? I'm about to get into a lot of information. I'm going to try to simplify it for you. I'm going to try to dumb it down for you. I want to remind you, I'm not an attorney. I am a single mom who has really good critical thinking skills. And all I've done is gone onto the California, looked up the United States law and the California law, and I will share with you what I have found, and you can come to your own conclusions. I'm not trying to give you any legal advice whatsoever, so please do your own due diligence and your own research. I'm going to move quickly through this section. I'm going to do a lot of summarizing, and at the end, I will kind of give you the bullet points of what we just covered. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that we are seeing many of our rights being infringed upon. I think everybody would agree with this. So I want to go back to the beginning. Our Declaration of Independence, this is not our Constitution, but it's an important document in the history of our country. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to point out that as an American, I'm sure many of you have never had to really ponder the meaning or the power of these words because they were never challenged the way they're being challenged right now. These words are very powerful. They're not just, ink on paper. These are words that have life and power behind them. And maybe for the first time in my life, I've had to really grab hold of them in order to understand them, and how blessed I've been to be raised under these philosophies my entire life. And I have always been granted these gifts. I've never had to defend them or explain them the way that I'm about to do right now to you. In continuation, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. I want to point out, governments are instituted among men to secure these rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I hope I'm shaking you awake right now to realize that you've probably never had to fully understand or defend or take claim to stand on these concepts, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What is a public servant? A public servant is a person holding a government office or job by election or appointment. It is a person in public service, and again, their job is to defend and secure these rights. So now we're going to talk about the United States Constitution. Our United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is, every judge in every state is bound to the Constitution. And I want to share this with you because I hope to empower you and help you understand that the law is on your side as long as you follow the law. Our Constitution is an ironclad contract. It is enforceable in a court of law. So I want to go over a couple of the amendments that are in the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment is our right of persons. No person shall be held. Basically, let me nutshell it for you. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Without due process of law. No person. Okay? The Ninth Amendment talks about any rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution they're still applicable. We still have rights, even if some of them are not outlined. In other words, it's kind of like all encompassing, that we shall not be denied our rights. The 14th Amendment is a guarantee of equal protection. Okay? All persons born or naturalized in the United States have equal access to life, liberty. Nobody shall be deprived, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, property without the due process of law. So no state shall make or enforce a law which will infringe on our privileges or immunities as citizens of the United States. And I want to point out that these are rights that are not given to us by our government. They are inalienable rights given to us by God and guaranteed and protected by our government. So I hope this is making sense to you. We, as individuals, are free and sovereign, granted those rights by God. They are spelled out in the Constitution, and they are protected by constitutional law. And please understand this. No one is above the law. No president, no governor, no public health officer, no county board of supervisors, no school board trustee, nobody, no school administrator, no principal, no teacher, no business owner, no neighbor is above the law. No government agency may make or enforce a policy or guideline that violates established law, period. No business or board of education is above the law. No public health officer. I know I've already covered that, but this is an important one because for some reason, I won't even get into the politics of it. I'm going to try to stay as neutral as possible. Public health officers have a lot of power and a lot of authority right now. Or let's just say it's a lot of perceived power and authority. Okay, but Christy, aren't we in a state of emergency? I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are under the impression that because we're in an alleged state of emergency, somehow the public health officers have the authority to create laws and enforce laws. No, that is not correct. So what I'm going to do is get into some legalese here. I'm going to try to interpret for you. Basically, this is from an American jurisprudence. It's basically a United States code. I believe it's from the United States versus California. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the United States. No emergency has just cause to suppress the Constitution or the rights of the people at large. They are inalienable rights. An emergency cannot create power, and no emergency justifies the violation of any of the provisions of the United States Constitution or states' constitutions. So basically what this is saying is that any mandates or suggestions or anything that's happening right now, it cannot be inconsistent with the Constitution. So again, no state of emergency will suspend established law, period. And I'm quoting Peggy Hall, thank you, Peggy, where she said, no executive order, no illness, no asteroid hitting the earth, nothing can suspend established law, our constitutional rights, or our civil rights. These are, this is off screen. These are given to us by God and protected in times like these. These laws are for such times as this, to protect our rights. The government is supposed to be protecting our rights. And then you might be saying, well, Christy, what about all of these mandates? What about the guidelines? What about the emergency measures? The general misconception is that any statute passed by a legislator bearing the appearance of law constitutes the law of the land. However, as we just discussed, the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any statute to be valid must be in agreement. It is impossible for both the Constitution and a law violating it to be valid. One must prevail. All right? So, an unconstitutional law in legal contemplation is as inoperative as if it had never been passed. What I'm in a nutshell for you is that if a law was created and it was opposed the Constitution, which protects our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then that law is inoperative as if it didn't even exist. I have a lot of people say, I'm sure you're saying, but Christy, we're going to be punished if we don't follow these quote unquote laws that are out there right now. Our business might be shut down. We might get sued. We might get cited. Our insurance might get canceled. We might get arrested. What if we're put in jail? There's a lot of fear out there of the consequence, basically, of not following whatever particular mandate or law is being put out there. Basically, what I'm in a nutshell is that no one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and no courts are bound to enforce it. Okay, this is a nutshell from reading still from the 16th American Jurisprudence, second edition, section 177. Since an unconstitutional law is void, the general principles follow that it imposes no duties, confers no rights, creates no office, bestows no power or authority. It's a void act. Okay, it is not a law. So you are not bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and the law is on your side. No court is bound to enforce it. Something very important to remember is that none of these mandates, guidelines, suggestions, whatever is being thrown around right now in this state of emergency, these are not laws to begin with. They were not created by our legislature, and they are not enforceable by law. They would not stand up in a court of law. In fact, for the most part, not only are they just suggestions, but they are intimidation. So you know your rights. Again, I'm not an attorney, okay? You're going to have to get your own legal advice. But I'm interpreting and sharing with you what I have found. There's something else very interesting that I found here. A neglect to protect by an individual under oath. So there's actually somebody who has taken an oath and to defend the United States Constitution. If they do not protect the Constitution and protect our rights, they are guilty of perjury and they can be fined or imprisoned. So take that in. Take that in for a minute. And there's another code here, action for neglect to prevent. There is a duty from our politicians. And if I have any elected officials watching this right now, you took an oath and you have a duty to prevent wrong from being done. All right, so I'm not going to read all of this. You can pause it. So I'm going to move into California law now, because in California, we're subject to the California laws. All right, so I want to go through this. The California preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the state of California, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom, in order to secure and perpetuate its blessings, do establish this Constitution. This is straight from the California Constitution, Article 1, Declaration of Rights, Section 7. A person may not be deprived of life, liberty, or property. By the way, on a separate note, property refers even to your own business. If you own a business, you may not be deprived without due process of law or denied equal protection of the laws, period. A citizen or class of citizens may not be granted privileges or immunities not granted on the same terms to all citizens. Privileges or immunities granted by the legislature may be altered or revoked. In other words, every citizen is equal to the other. More from our Constitution. All people are by nature free and independent and have inalienable rights. Among these are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety, happiness, and privacy. Again, I'm not here to give advice to businesses, but if you are a business owner, these are your rights. Okay, and this isn't even what this is about. We're going back to that we are free and independent and have inalienable rights. We also have, just as a side note, free exercise and enjoyment of religion without discrimination. This liberty does not excuse acts. Okay, so the legislature cannot make a law respecting an establishment of religion. By the way, there's not even a law. There have been random mandates. So side note, if you're a pastor or a minister, or you want to present this to your pastor or minister, we have free exercise. It's not only protected by the United States Constitution, but by the California Constitution. Now, here's something very interesting about how laws are made in California. There are different branches of the California government, just like the United States. So we have a legislative branch, And that it consists of the Senate and the Assembly, and the people reserve to themselves the powers of initiative and referendum. So from what I understand, what this means is that we as the constituents in California, we vote senators and legislators who then create the laws, the powers of initiative, the people who actually create the laws. Again, I could be reading this wrong, but that's my understanding. Laws are created by the legislature. The executive power of the state is in the governor. And look at the governor's job. The governor's job is to execute the law. And again, I want to credit Peggy Hall, who brought this to my attention, that the governor cannot create a law. His job is to execute the law, which ironically, our law is about protecting our rights. Kind of seems to me like somebody is not doing his job. All right. Now, the powers of state government that are legislative, executive, and judicial. The persons charged with the exercise of one power may not exercise either of the others. So the governor cannot make laws, and the legislator cannot enforce the laws. They can't switch roles. All right? Period. So a governor cannot write laws, and a mandate is not a law. Guidelines and mandates are not laws, and they're not enforceable by law. So there's no law you're breaking if you don't follow the random emergency mandates that, by the way, don't even apply anymore because we're not in a state of emergency. Even Gavin Newsom himself says, I cannot mandate anything. I can only help influence. This is straight out of his own mouth because he knows. The South Dakota governor, Kristi Noem, she said she did not impose COVID-19 lockdowns because she herself said, I don't have the authority to do that. She said, I quote, I know that when you have a leader overstep their authority in a time of crisis, that's really when you lose this country. And I didn't want to be guilty of doing that. So this woman is not breaking the law. Other governors have broken the law. Let that really sink in. Now we're going to talk about California civil rights law. So we're going to go in a little bit deeper. There is something in the California law called Civil Code 51. I'm going to try to summarize this for you. Again, I'm not an attorney, so you can interpret it as you wish, but from what I see, it states that all persons are free and equal, no matter, and I'm going to highlight a few things, no matter their religion, their disability, their medical condition, they are entitled to full and equal accommodations, advantages, facilities, privileges, or services in all business establishments of every kind whatsoever. Okay, this is the law. So what is meant by disability? Let's talk about this for a minute. A disability means any mental or physical disability. So I'm going to break this down. I'm going to keep it simple for you. Physical disability can affect a bodily system, and I highlighted respiratory. It has to do with major life activities or something that could limit a major life activity. And it has to do with mitigating measures that could limit a major life activity, or if it makes the achievement of a major life activity difficult. Major life activities shall be broadly construed and includes physical, mental, and social activities and working. So right now I'm talking about several things, but I'm specifically talking about the mask. Now let's talk about mental disability. Again, mental disability, anything having to do with a mental or psychological disorder that could limit major life activities. And if you go down to the bottom, those shall again be broadly construed as physical, mental, and social activities and working. So, and California Civil Code 43, besides the personal rights mentioned, this references that everybody has the right of protection from bodily restraint or harm, from personal insult, from defamation, and from injury to his personal relations. I interpret this code as referring to bodily autonomy, that there is some form of bodily autonomy that we have in California over our own bodies. So in a nutshell, no person may be discriminated against who chooses not to wear a mask for physical or mental disability reasons. So let me go back and remind you that the mask is considered a medical device. It does affect your physiology, or it can. And there are many reasons why somebody could choose to claim a physical or mental disability as to not wear a mask. Okay, this is in the law. Here's what else. Under claiming a disability, that nobody can interfere by threat, intimidation, or coercion. Anybody who is basically trying to exercise their rights to their individual rights secured by the United States. There can be no intimidation or threats or coercion of any of us. Okay, if for any reason we're claiming our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and or physical and mental disability, such as not wearing a mask. And in fact, if we are intimidated, threatened, or coerced, we may bring a civil action up to and including $25,000 or more. So take that in for a minute. I take it that I can't threaten or intimidate my neighbor. If I'm a business owner, I cannot threaten or intimidate anybody who's enjoying their rights secured by the Constitution. And I take it that a school cannot intimidate or coerce anybody who's claiming a physical or mental disability. And by the way, it doesn't say in that code that somebody has to provide a doctor's note in order to claim a disability. It doesn't say you have to provide written proof. In America, we can claim a disability, period. All right? Okay. So I'm in a nutshell the previous slide here, the American jurisprudence. There's a lot of words there, but basically the state did not give the citizen his rights and thus cannot take them away as it chooses. All right? The state did not give us our rights and cannot take them away. Now I want to talk for a minute about the Patient's Bill of Rights. A Patient's Bill of Rights is a list of guarantees. Basically what it does is it is a form that provides information, and it guarantees information, fair treatment, and autonomy over medical decisions, among other rights. Again, I want to credit Peggy Hall. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I did used to work in a medical facility. I'm extremely familiar with the Patient's Bill of Rights. It's just been a couple of years and I had forgotten about it. But this is a very important part of the medical community and the medical process in the United States. Every patient receives a Bill of Rights, which basically includes complete autonomy over medical decisions. It is unlawful for you to be forced into any medical intervention. You do not have to submit to any medical treatments that you do not feel comfortable with. You also have a right to full information about any medical intervention that you are being exposed to. So we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. Let's talk about religious exemptions. And remember, I'm going back, masks are a medical intervention. All right. Let's talk about religious exemptions. So there is an exemption in the state law that allows for religious exemptions. This has to do with religious observance, belief, and any aspects of that practice. It includes religious dress and grooming practices. Religious dress practice, it shall be construed broadly to include the wearing or carrying of religious clothing, including head or face coverings. Now, there are some religious practices that include covering the face, and there are some that actually include not covering the face. There's actually a church I believe it's in Russia, that is forbidding masks, and the priest explains why. He says that covering the face, basically, face covering is against our religious beliefs. In Scripture, hiding one's face always means shame, distrust, unfavorable position, division, and separation. And he says we will not wear a mask. It's basically a contradiction to our religious beliefs. Long ago, Arabs discovered that forcing people to cover their noses and mouths broke their wills and individuality and depersonalized them. It made them submissive. So as you can see here, a religious exemption is also a right that we have. I'm pretty sure it's in the United States law as well, but this I'm reading specifically from the California state law. Now let's talk about the California law pertaining to education. Before I jump into this, I did research that it is required by students to attend school. I forgot to screenshot that one, but kids are required to attend school. It is a law for our children to attend school. So that's kind of like an assumption here as I jump into the next section. Now, this is from a list of California Code of Regulations. You can do your own research on this if you want to screenshot this. No person in the state of California shall be subjected to discrimination in terms of educational institutions. No person shall be excluded from participation in or denied the benefits of any local agency's program based on, and I'm going to highlight a few, based on mental or physical disability, religion, or religion. Okay, so in a nutshell, no educational institution may discriminate. Now, this is directly referring to any institutions that receive state financial assistance, which I know is public schools. I do not know how private schools fit into this. It's just basically going on about equal treatment, no discrimination. A part of the Title V, basically the nutshell is that it ensures educational equity. It ensures compliance with federal and state non-discrimination and harassment. And in fact, that schools must recognize and eliminate unlawful discrimination. This is from the California Code of Education. And let's look into now Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, we're just going to cover the same thing. Nobody shall be discriminated against. So no qualified individual with a disability shall be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of services, programs, etc. This also includes nursery school, elementary, secondary, undergraduate, postgraduate school. Oh, private school. I didn't even see that. Oh, no, postgraduate private school. Nursery, elementary. So this might be applicable to private and public schools or any other place of education. So I guess I just answered my own question. I actually missed that before. No individual shall be discriminated against and shall enjoy equal enjoyment of the or accommodations. And I want to point out that equal accommodation is not some of the kids are on campus and some of the kids are at home. Okay, that is not equal accommodation when it comes to school. We've already established that online school is not the same as on-campus school. Here's another long list of rules pertaining to discrimination. You can't deny people to participate. So I'm going to wrap it up and nutshell this section for you. In conclusion, a mask is a medical device. It is a medical treatment. There are pros and cons. There are definitely, consequences for wearing the mask. Medical treatments are a personal choice protected by law. Exemptions exist for those with medical disabilities who choose not to mask. Exemptions exist for those who choose not to mask for religious reasons. Nowhere in the law does it state that you have to explain yourself or put it into writing or get a doctor's note. They are protected by law. No mandate or guidance created during an emergency can override these already existing laws. Also, a mandate or guidance is not a law. It is a recommendation. No legitimate or illegal state of emergency overrides these laws. No place of business, school, or any individual may discriminate or harass those who claim exemptions. If they do, they can be held legally liable and can be sued or worse. In fact, elected officials and any administrators in any school are required by law to endorse the law and protect the rights of all individuals. If they do the opposite, they are breaking their oath of office. Okay, so to be clear, in case I haven't made myself clear, none of the following have the right to require myself or my son to wear a mask, nor discriminate against us if we do not. I apologize for the typo. Our president cannot, our governor cannot, our California public health officer cannot, our board of supervisors in Orange County cannot, our Orange County public health officer cannot, our Orange County Board of Education trustees cannot, a neighbor or stranger in public cannot, a place of business, my son's school administration or staff. Masking is a medical decision and it's a personal choice, period. It is a choice that is protected by many laws in our country. I hope I've made my point. And I want to point out something very interesting. I will leave this open to your interpretation, but any court, government, or government officer who acts in violation of these oaths that he or she has made commits treason. Very, very interesting. Commits treason against our own Constitution. It is the duty of every lawful American citizen to oppose all enemies of this nation, foreign and domestic. These are pretty big words. This is a pretty big concept. All right. Treason against the state consists only in levying war against it, adhering to its enemies, or giving them aid and comfort. Just as a side note, well, I won't get, there's some politics here I'm not going to get into, but you can interpret this however you want. But it is our duty of every citizen to enforce the law, to support the law, to protect the law, and to protect the rights of others, according to our California law and our United States law. All right, let's take a deep breath. We're almost done, guys. All right, so let's talk for a minute about temperature checks, because it's very interesting to me that these have become a thing. So, temperature checks are also a form of a medical procedure. It is determining information about somebody else's health. It is private medical information, and historically only your doctor or a licensed medical professional had access to take your temperature or to know what your temperature is. So in the United States and in California, we have a right to privacy. We have a right to medical privacy. Our personal medical information is private. If you are not a licensed medical provider, it is my understanding that you cannot diagnose, put your business into, or ask questions about somebody else's medical status. This is a liability nightmare. If you are an administrator or a decision maker at a school, at a place of business of any kind, my suggestion and encouragement to you is that you cease and desist any temperature checks immediately. I'm going to get into a little bit more. Number one, what if somebody does have a fever? I've noticed that temperature checks are happening out in public in front of many other people. So what, do you announce it publicly and then send them home? How do you have the authority to not only broadcast somebody's personal information about their health, but to send them home to make a determination as to diagnose if they are sick or not sick? Major medical privacy violation, liability issues for you. Also, there's many reasons we may have a fever that have nothing to do with the coronavirus. I mean, it is not, the PTA member's job to make that determination. It's not the front desk clerk at the gym's job to make that determination. Also, huge implications. What if somebody does have coronavirus? They do have symptoms, but they don't have a fever. This happens as well. You are just opening a huge can of worms if you decide to take on this emergency mitigation measure. Okay, now I want to talk about HIPAA for a minute. HIPAA is a privacy rule, and it establishes a set of national standards for the protection of certain health information. It establishes standards for individuals' privacy rights to understand and control how their health information is used. A major goal is to assure that individuals' health information is properly protected. What information is protected? Now, before I go on, I want to say HIPAA does not technically apply to a school. I'll talk about that in a minute. It doesn't technically apply to a school, but this information is important. What information is protected in HIPAA? The privacy rule protects all individually identifiable health information held or transmitted by a covered entity or its business associate in any form or media, whether electronic, paper, or oral. The privacy rule calls this information PHI, protected health information. So again, individually identifiable health information, anything related to the individual's past, present, or future physical or mental health or condition. Okay. Technically, HIPAA doesn't even apply to schools. It applies to medical providers, insurance companies. It's basically, I've worked in the medical field for years, like I said, in the administrative side. I received extensive training on HIPAA. Huge violation problems if you violate HIPAA. It's pertaining to medical privacy, each individual's person's right to medical privacy. But if a school decides to start practicing medicine without a license, are you now regulated by HIPAA? Do you have to provide there are patient disclosure forms, there's HIPAA forms, there's laws, there's forms you have to provide if somebody's privacy is violated, if they need to come back and sue you. There's all kinds of disclosures that have to be signed in a medical environment. So if a school decides to start practicing medicine, are you now covered under HIPAA? I don't know, but I'm baffled how many schools and places of business are infringing on this, basically stepping into territory that has a ton of liability. I'm just face palming everywhere that I see this happening. So I want to back up and remind you, no state of emergency justifies an invasion of medical privacy or justifies breaking any of the laws that are established. Now, I don't have any more, laws for you from the state of California on this. All I can tell you is that if you're an administrator or decision maker, I highly encourage you to do your due diligence. I don't know which agency. I don't know if it's, it's not the governor. The governor doesn't have control over the schools, how the schools do or do not open. I don't know if it's the public health officers. I don't know where all of these safety guidelines are coming from that the schools are implementing. I understand it has to do with maybe our local public health officer, maybe our Board of Education, maybe our county Board of Supervisors. But all I know is, from my experience, a school cannot step into medical mitigation measures. You are asking for major lawsuits. All right. So think on that and chew on that with your own critical thinking skills. Let's move into to the end of this presentation. Now let's briefly discuss the moral, ethical, and ideological dilemmas going on here pertaining to our children. So there is a dilemma here, which has to do with some political intervention that I'll try to keep this as neutral as possible. But there is an ideology that exists in the world that says that the good of the government is more important than individual rights, and that, they can mandate anything pertaining to the health of their constituents. That a nanny state is okay, enmeshment with each other, being responsible for your neighbor, that it's okay for billboards and freeway signs to give medical advice. Okay, that's one ideology. And then there is America. We are founded on personal responsibility, God-given freedoms, rights, and liberties, medical privacy, freedom of choice, and the government protects our freedoms and our personal choice over our bodies. So I want to talk for a minute about personal boundaries. There is some sort of grooming, and again, I'm going to stay out of the reasons why. We won't get into that right now, but I will just acknowledge what I've seen. I'm going to discuss what I've seen, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me. There is some form of conditioning or grooming, social conditioning that is happening right now. There is an invasion of personal boundaries taking place. And I want to point out that just like a predator, I'm going to try to keep this, I'm sure there's going to be children watching this. There are certain bad guys out there on the planet, and they start with small, innocent, seemingly harmless infringements on somebody's boundaries to see how much they can get away with. This is how perpetrators work. And what's happening right now is there is some movement that is trying to take away our children's ability to say no. From the time my son was little, I taught him how to say a very simple statement. I am not comfortable with that. 6 words. And what's happening right now, this movement is taking away our children's ability to say that. There is some form of gaslighting and shaming taking place. So there are messages floating around now that are teaching a complete disregard for a violation of body boundaries, the opposite of the message that I have spent my entire past 13 years raising my son to believe and to understand. There is a violation of body boundaries, and then there's a disregard of it. So these are the phrases, the messages that are going around. It's no big deal that you have to wear a mask or get your temperature checked. Your discomfort doesn't matter. Just do it. You're being selfish if you set boundaries. You are responsible for keeping me safe. Peer pressure. Just comply because everybody else is doing it, even though it makes no sense. Ignore your own instincts, your own senses, your own common sense, all right? Your own conscience. So here's an example of healthy boundaries. This is what I've taught my son. He knows personal body boundaries, personal space, okay? Here's what's happening right now. I don't understand exactly why. I have my own ideas and opinions. I won't get into that. I will let you decide for yourself why you think it's happening, but I think we can all agree and acknowledge that it is actually still happening as we speak. So for those of you that are watching this right now, if you're a decision maker, I'm calling you to a higher standard for the sake of our children. If you are enforcing social distancing, physical distancing, online learning, mandatory masking, mandatory temp checks, all for the sake of safety or obedience, quote unquote safety or obedience, you are complicit in the tyranny that is taking place right now. I know these are some tough words that I'm saying, but I'm trying to shake you awake. You are not following the data and the science that I've spent the past hour in this presentation presenting to you, nor are you using your God-given common sense. If you're acquiescing, it's for one of the following reasons. So I ask you to reflect. Is it because of fear? Is it because of peer pressure? Maybe it's because of ignorance, which you cannot claim anymore after watching this video. Maybe you do have malintent towards our children. Maybe you are just spineless. Maybe you're abandoning your highest values and convictions. Maybe there's some lawlessness in you. I hope nobody watching this fits in that category. I don't know the reason why, but I've brought to your attention and I've appealed to you with the data, with the legalities, and now we're talking about the moral dilemma. Why would we make our kids follow illogical policies that are possibly, very likely harmful for them, psychologically, physically damaging, based on bad science? Following bad science is bad leadership, if not worse. And in some cases, if you're a political leader, it could be considered criminal activity. We have an ethical duty to cause no harm to our children, no matter what. Adults, parents, teachers, administrators, political leaders, health officers, board of supervisors, we have to figure this out. It is our job. We are the adults. Was not necessity the plea of every illegal exertion of power or exercise of oppression? Necessity is the plea for very infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves. Let's course correct. Let's take our power back. I'm asking you to be courageous. Listen to your common sense. Listen to your convictions. Listen to your values. Do you remember as a child learning about the United States, the history of our country, and how it was founded by people who were brave, who had to stand on their convictions and stand up for what is right for our children? I need to be able to trust, and our kids need to be able to trust the parents, the teachers, and the school boards. This is our opportunity to teach our children everything that we dream of teaching our children, right? To stand up for what they believe in, to use their critical thinking skills, to allow our children to say no when they are uncomfortable, to say no to pretending, taking a stand for their constitutional freedoms. There are no half measures here. I'm not asking my son to pretend just a little bit. Just put on the mask to walk into the classroom. My son has well-developed critical thinking skills. I've already shown him this presentation. He's already decided for himself, and my son will stand up for what he believes in. He will say no when he's uncomfortable. He refuses to put on a mask. He refuses to watch a class that was just presented to him just now. I peeked out into the living room. He stepped out of a class where they were starting to give instruction on masks. He ended the class. I honor my son standing up with his integrity and saying no and standing up honestly for his constitutional freedoms. In America, we have a right to petition. We have a right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And one of the ways that we do that is through civil disobedience. There does come a point if a government has overstepped and there's too much government overreach and power grab. It is our job on a micro level to resist, to peacefully resist. Civil disobedience is the active professed refusal of a citizen to obey certain laws, demands, orders, or commands of a government. It is peaceful, it is nonviolent, and the more parents and adults that push back and refuse to follow the overreach that's happening right now in our state and in our country, the sooner it will come to a stop. They cannot mandate 40 million people to do something who won't do it. These are just some quotes about civil disobedience. Disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. I know that it's difficult in America. We have never had to stand up for our rights. We've never had to disobey. We've never had to not follow laws. I understand this is shaking a lot of people awake, but it's time to wake up when it comes to our children. There is no exception and excuse when it comes to our children. So now as I close, I'm going to cover a very common sense, a very simple suggested school COVID policy based on ethics and science. This is a plan that takes into account the whole student comprehensively, again, versus obsessing about physical health at the expense of mental, educational, social, emotional, and psychological health. So my suggestion to anybody watching this who is in a position to do so is that you personally write an ethical school COVID policy. Take your power back. Do not give the power of how you run your school to a corrupt politician and or board member. Like I said, I don't know who's actually making your decisions for you, but I would base it on these things. Accurate risk assessment for the various demographics based on data and science, not fear and illogical emotion. So putting into your report the data of who is high risk for this virus. Honoring constitutional and civil rights. A basic understanding of the immune system, that this virus, that people with reasonably healthy immune systems go through the virus like a flu and they come out the other side just fine. That is what the immune system is for. Emphasizing personal responsibility, medical privacy, boundaries, and bodily autonomy. If kids feel symptoms, they can stay home. Encourage the children to wash their hands often. Ask the kids to not sneeze or cough on other kids. Assume that cases will happen. This is what happens. Children, as I mentioned in California, were about 9% of the cases. This actually helps with herd immunity. Decisions or policies will be based on science, not emotion. And high-risk individuals can choose to mask or stay home and attend school online if they so choose. Again, healthy children come to school. Sick children stay home. Otherwise, no emergency mitigation measures. Educate families on the data and the science and the pros and cons of masks. Again, these are medical interventions. Masks are optional based on personal family risk assessment. For example, if a child is concerned and feels that he doesn't want to take something home, maybe he lives with his grandma who has cancer, that kid can decide if he wants to come to school and wear a fitted mask, or if he wants to stay home and attend school online until such time as we believe the virus has passed, even though it does appear, as I've mentioned, that it's mostly passed. Temperature checks only to be done at home, so to respect medical privacy, asking families, if you're fever, to take a temperature every morning. And if you have a fever, stay home. Very simple. No mandatory testing of the staff. There is such a high chance for false positives. There's no need to violate the medical privacy of the staff as well. No modifications in the classroom, no demand for physical distancing, no other inconvenience or distraction, with the full understanding that the more distractions, the more draining it is for the children psychologically and on their ability to focus on their education, keeping things as normal as possible. And very simply, create a liability waiver. By the way, I want to throw in, there is no law that states that a place of business can be sued based on a virus. An individual cannot prove that they got a virus at a certain location. They are not guaranteed a right to not get a virus at a certain location. That is not built into our Constitution. There is no precedent for a place of business to be sued because somebody thinks they got sick in that space. So a simple liability waiver explaining that these are the risks. Everybody can make their own choices based on the assessment of the risk. And you can either attend school or not attend school based on your concern and your choice. And I'd like to conclude with this. Perhaps you were born for such a time as this. Again, I challenge all of us to dig deeper, think more critically, trust your conscience, trust your convictions. You know in your heart that something isn't right. I'm asking you to be brave. I'm asking you to put your foot down. Maybe this is what you were created for, is a time such as this, to stand up for our kids and to do the right thing. Thank you for watching my presentation, and please share it as much as you can.